So hello everyone, this is week 11 and now we are going to start with another new chapter, which is exception handling. Exceptions are basically the unexpected event that can occur during while we are running our program, not compiling our program. So they are some unexpected event. So let's start with the chapter. What does exception handling means? We will start with exception handling basics, and then we will move towards more advanced things. Alright, so exceptions are the unexpected events which interrupts the further execution of the program. Our code runs in an unexpected way. Unexpected events are represented by an object of the exception class. So whatever unexpected events are, that means exception, they are an object of the exception class. Now whenever unexpected event occurs, Java throws one object of exception class to stop further execution of the program. Alright, let me just give you an example of the unexpected event. For example, let me just make a program, quickly make a program, a very small program. Okay, let me just give it an example 1. Let me change the path. Okay, so we are in week 11 now. Alright, so let me just make it demo 1. Alright, so public class demo 1. I'm going to make a very simple program. Integer a is equals to 5 and int b is equals to 0. Alright, I make a main method, public static void main, string args. Now what I do, int c is equals to a divided by b, and system.out.println the answer is plus c, and I write another system.out.println end of the program. Alright, let's just check it. Okay, I need to declare it inside this. So if you see, my program compiles successfully, it does not have any error, right? Now let's check what happens when we run the program. So let's now try to run our program. Now if you have seen, I get some message over here, exception in the thread main Java, divide arithmetic exception divide by 0. Now if you have seen, my program does not have any syntax error. It has a runtime error. So exceptions are the errors which are in the logic of the program. They are not the errors in the syntax of the program. So exceptions are actually unexpected events. So if you see, I have not expected that this will happen to my program. So these are the unexpected events which are caused when you run your program and they disrupt the normal flow. So if you see, it has disrupted the normal flow, because after dividing it should print the answer and it should print some more system.out.print statement also. So my program has been interrupted. I cannot run my program further. So these are called as exceptions. Runtime errors are called as exceptions, which are actually in the logic of the program. These errors are not in the syntax of the program. So whenever unexpected event occurs, Java throws one object of exception class and it stops the further execution. Why exception occurs? We give a bad input. For example, some invalid data has been given. For example, you have to provide integer value, but you provide a string value. You are reading from a file, but that file does not exist. You are trying to connect to a database, but the database server is down. Your JVM has run out of memory, or some bad programming practices. Some of these exceptions are caused by user error, others by programmer error, and some of them can be caused by the physical error also. So the practice is to write a clean and the elegant code. So exception can arise from any kind of situation. For example, wrong data entered by the user, hardware failure, network failure, a database, a server down. Now, when an exception occurs in the method, the process of creating the exception object and handling it over to the runtime environment is called as the throwing exception. So now, to catch this type of unexpected event, we need some sort of handler who can handle this type of unexpected event. So that is called as the exception handling. Now, there are two kinds of exceptions, which are checked exceptions, and the other ones are the unchecked exceptions. Checked exceptions, they are also called as the compile time exceptions. Now, in this case, compiler forces us to handle until we handle it and we get the compilation error. Here we get the compilation error, we cannot proceed further. Since compiler checks for these exceptions, it is called as the checked exception. Examples are input-output exception. For example, if we are trying to read from a file which does not exist, that is an input-output exception. SQL exception, if we have any error in writing our SQL statements, that is SQL exception. Another kind of class of exception is unchecked or runtime exception. We are going to talk about these exceptions in this chapter. So unchecked or runtime exceptions. Unchecked exceptions, they are also called as runtime exceptions. These happen due to the programmer's fault. If you have seen the program that I wrote, it was the programmer's fault. It will not be checked by the compiler, and if you saw when I compiled, my program compiled successfully to see whether program has handled or not. It is the programmer's responsibility to handle these exceptions. Examples are null pointer exception, arithmetic exception, array index out of bound exception, negative number exception, and many more. Now let's talk about the exception hierarchy over here. Alright, now as we know that exceptional scenarios that are out of the scope of the application and it's not possible to anticipate and recover from them. Examples are hardware failure, errors of out of memory, and stack overflow error. So we will have a separate hierarchy for these errors. And in the last slide, we have talked about checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. So let's just talk about hierarchy. All exception classes, they are the subtype of the. Now, if you see exception class belongs to the parent class for the exception class is the throwable class. Alright, let's just start from the top. All exception classes, they are the subtype of the java.lang.exception. So we have an object class which belongs to java.object. We have a throwable class which belongs to java.lang. Throwable is the subclass of the object class. Now under throwable, we have two subclasses. One is the error and exception. So the parent class of exception and error is throwable class. In this chapter, we are going to talk about exception. Error is derived from throwable and exception class is derived from throwable. Now exception class has again two further types. Runtime exceptions and other exceptions. So exception class is the parent class of all runtime exception. Exception class is the parent class of all runtime exceptions. Alright, now let's, this is an example of the checked exception, although we are not going to do this in our this chapter, but still an example. So we use this when we are going to do a read or write operation from the file. So if you use a file reader class in your program to read a data file and the specified constructor does not exist, then the file not found exception occurs and the compiler prompts the programmer to handle the exception. So if you see over here, we have not provided the constructor. Methods read and close of the file reader, they throw input output exception, so the file notifies it. Now here there should be some exception should be thrown over here in this statement. So this is an example of the checked exception. Now let's talk about unchecked exception. I just did a program. The program that I did was an example of the unchecked exception and it belonged to arithmetic exception. So similarly, this is also an example of the unchecked exception. So what is done over here? We have declared an array num and it has 4 elements, but we are trying to print the element number 5. Since the element does not exist, so it will throw a runtime error which is called as the unchecked exception, and the type of exception is array index out of bound exception, and we are trying to print the element number 5. Errors, not all exceptions at all. So not exceptions at all, but problems that arise beyond the control of the user of the programmer. These are the abnormal conditions that can happen in case of severe failures. It cannot be handled by Java programs and generated to indicate errors. So Stack Overflow, JVM is out of memory. These are the errors. So what is the difference between error and exception? Errors indicate that something very severe or has gone wrong and the application will crash rather than you try to handle the error. And exceptions are the events that occur in the code. If you can recall the example that I did, the problem was in the code. A program, but these are not syntax errors. These are the errors in the logic of the program, not in the syntax of the program. Exceptions are always the errors in the logic of the program, not in the syntax of the program. So a programmer can handle such conditions and take necessary actions. We have examples: null pointer exception, when you try to use a reference variable but it points to null; arithmetic exception, when the bad data is provided, for example divide by 0; and array index out of bound. So now we need something to handle the exceptions. So let's talk about the exception handling, because if there is an exception in the program, we need to handle that exception. So exception handling is a powerful mechanism in Java. Any piece of code that might cause an exception has to be handled. So it helps us to continue with further execution of the program. It will not stop or halt our program abruptly if some unexpected event occurs while we are running our program. So it handles unexpected behavior of the program and continues the execution in a smooth way, showing that something has never been occurred. So we can handle the exceptions in any one of the 2 ways: try catch block and the throw block. So a try block is immediately followed by the catch block. So a try block is a block where we try to write our code which can cause an error. Catch block catches the exception thrown in the try block. Since a number of exceptions can be thrown, catch must specify the class of the exception it is handling. Alright, now we have a number of keywords which we are going to use with the exception handling. We have try, catch, throw, throws, and finally. And it is done by transferring the execution of a program to an appropriate exception handler when an exception occurs. We will learn how the flow of program works with the exception handling. So let's first of all try to learn about these keywords. So the try catch block. Try keyword is used to specify a block where we should write the code which is likely to cause an error. So the try block must be followed either by catch block or finally block. We will talk about catch block first, finally block we will talk later. It means we can't use try block alone. We have to use try block either with the catch block or with the finally block, or we can include both also. Catch block is used to handle the exception. It must be preceded by the try block, which means we cannot use the catch block alone. It can be followed by the finally block later. Finally block is used to execute the important code of the program. For example, when we try to close a file or close the database, so it is executed whether an exception is handled or not. So finally block will always be executed, doesn't matter your code causes an exception or not. Throw keyword is used to throw an exception. Throws keyword is used to declare exception. So it throw an exception, it declares an exception, it does not throw an exception. It specifies, throws keyword specifies that there may occur an exception in the method. It is always used with the method signature. So in this lecture I am not going to talk about throw and throws. Rest all the keywords I am going to talk about. Throw and throws I will make another lecture and I will talk about this in the next lecture. Alright, so let's talk about the exception handling syntax. So try block has those statements which are likely to cause our errors. It is the logic of our program. So the logic of our program must be written in the try block. Catch has something, it takes some parameter in the brackets, and catch will handle our exception or the unexpected behavior of the program. So the normal code goes into the try block and the exception handling code goes into the catch block. So when an arithmetic exception occurs, we use the arithmetic exception occurs, divide a number by 0, null pointer exception, for example string s is equals to null and we try to print a string. Array index out of bound, for example the size of array is 5 but we are trying to print the 10th element. Now how to use the try catch block? Alright, so let me just try to update my code which I did it before. So if you can recall this code, it caused an error, right? Although it compiled successfully. Now by using the try catch block, let's just try to write it. I don't need any files. So what I will do, I will just declare the integers int a, b and c. Now I will just put a try block here. In the try block I will write whatever my code is. Whatever the code I want to write, I will put it in the try block. I am going to talk about only the arithmetic exception. Alright, so after doing the computation, let's print the result also. Now I know that since this is the logic of my program, it may cause an error. So in the catch block, catch, and I know that it may cause an arithmetic exception because I am the programmer. I know that what type of exception this code might cause. So arithmetic exception, it's a class of the exceptions, runtime exceptions, arithmetic exception, and I will make an object of arithmetic exception, maybe e. So here I will write my code whatever I want to display to the user. System.out.println the number cannot be divided by 0. So this is what I want to display to the user if something happens, if some unexpected event is caused. So this is the message that I want to display to the user instead of the system defined method. So let's just check. Okay, because I have defined it again, that's why. Alright. Okay. So let's now try to do it. So if you see over here, now it's not giving me any system defined error message like error in java.lang.something, or which I cannot understand. So this is a message given by the programmer which anyone can understand. So if you see, because the error is caused over here, this line is not executed. The error is caused in this lines where I am doing the computation. Because the error is caused in this line, so what happens when the try block is executed? How does the execution works? First of all, A is initialized to 5, B is initialized to 0, then I try to do this calculation. When we try to attempt this calculation, because it has an arithmetic error, so the next line, which is the system.out.println, where I am printing the C, it is skipped. It will not be executed. Control will be passed to the catch block. Now catch block will be executed. Whatever is there in the catch block, the statements inside the catch block will be executed. After exiting out of the catch block, the control will not go back again to the try block. Rather, if we have certain statements written after the catch block, they will be executed and my normal flow of program will be executed. So for example, if I do something over here now, for example, A is equals to 5, B is equals to 5, and C is equals to A plus B, and system.out.println, the answer is, okay, rather than answer, the addition is C. Now, very important point to note over here, if an exception occurs in the line, the next line of code is skipped. It will not be executed. The control will be passed to the nearest catch block. After executing the statements inside the catch block, the control will come out of the catch block and will start with executing the rest of the program in the normal way. So let's just check it, what I am saying, whether it does or not. Alright, so if you see over here, this is what I said. Because the error was caused over here in this line, C is equals to A divided by B. So the the next line, which is system.out.println statement, was skipped. Control was passed to the catch block. The line inside the catch block was executed. And then after executing the statement inside the catch block, the control comes out of the catch block and starts executing the rest of the statements which are given in the program in the normal way. So if you see, the next I am adding the two numbers and I am printing the result. My program is continuing. So my program is not at all interrupted now, as before, where my program stopped abruptly without giving any error. So exception handling is a way to handle the logical errors of the program and keep on continuing with the rest of the program normally. Alright, now let's consider a situation where I don't have any exception over here. So let me just make it 5. Alright. Now I do not have any exception over here, right? Now what should happen in this case? How my program should run? So A is equals to 5, B is equals to 5, C is equals to A divided by B. There is no error, right? So this statement will be executed. It will print the answer is 1. Now in this case, catch block will not be executed. Since there is no exception encountered, catch block will not be executed. So after executing the statement system.out.println, answer is C, control will skip this catch block and come to the rest of the program. So now what will happen? A is equals to 5, B is equals to 5, C is equals to A plus B, and it will print the addition. So let's check whether it does or not. So if you see over here, since there was no exception, so both the print statements are executed. Alright, going back over here, so this is what try is used to guard a block when the exception occurs. So it actually contains the statements where an exception occurs. It is always followed by the catch block, which handles the exception. So it involves declaring the type of exception you are trying to catch if an exception occurs. Catch block follows the try, and if the type of exception that occurred is listed, then the exception is handled. It must be, now try block can be followed by the catch block or finally block or both of them. So this is an example over here. So the catch block is the block where to handle the exception. It must be followed followed after the try block. Single try block can have multiple catch blocks. We will discuss it now. There can be multiple catch blocks with only a single try block. Catch block can catch different exceptions in different catch blocks. When an exception occurs in a try block, the corresponding catch block that handles the particular exception will be executed. So for example, if an arithmetic exception occurs in a try block, then the statement enclosed in the catch block for the arithmetic exception will be executed. Alright, let's go further to the next slide. Now, for example, if you see over here, this is what I have done in my program. So, number 1 divided by number 2, and we have it as 0. So, in this case, what will happen? How the program flow will be executed. Since there is a logical error in this program, this statement will not be executed. So, control will be passed to the catch block. Statement inside the catch block will be executed. Then it will add the two numbers and it will print the addition of the two numbers. Now, a single try block can have multiple catch blocks also. While using multiple catch statements, now it's very important to remember the subclass of the exception class. The subclasses of the class exception inside catch must come before any of their superclasses. So because if any code is unreachable, then it can give a compile time error. So if you see in this case, we have an array of two numbers. Array 2, the second element 3 divided by 0, because it's the nearest or the most suitable catch block will be executed. Okay, let's try to do an example over here. Let's try to execute it. Let's to just know how this will be executed. Alright, let's try to do this the same program. So let me just make an array. I will just remove all this. I'll make an array and I will define the elements of the array. Alright, at position 2, I don't have any element at position 2 is equals to 3 divided by 0. Let me just remove it. I can have multiple catch blocks. Okay, so I will change the message over here. This was divide by 0 and I can have array index out of, O should be capital, out of bounds, bounds, exception. I have to make the object. So I will just print over here array element does not exist. Right, now if you see over here, there is no let's just compile it to check whether there is an error or not. Okay, So there is no syntax error, but there is a logical error. Let's just check it. The number cannot be divided by 0. Although you see over here, in this statement, both the exceptions occur. Arithmetic exception also because it's divided by 0, and even array index out of bound exception also because we don't have any array at position number 2. So although both array index out of bound and arithmetic exception occurs, but since the first catch block is of arithmetic exception, it will be caught and program control will be continued after the catch block. So because this is the first catch block and this type of exception has also occurred, so that's why it will be printed. Alright, now let's just try to do something else. For example, if I do 3 divided by 3, now there is no divide by 0 errors. We only have array index out of bound error. Let's just try to run it. So array element does not exist because in that case, in this line, in the previous case, both the exception occurs, and since this was the first catch block, that's why it was printed. Now if I do the other way around, for example, if I do it like this and I roll back to my first statement, now let's see what will be printed. Let's just run it. Again, in this case, because this was the type of exception which has been encountered first, that's why arithmetic exception. Exception because the first catch is of arithmetic exception, so it will be caught and the program will end over here. So here it will cause the arithmetic exception. Alright, so going ahead for the program again to the slides. Alright, we can have the multiple catch blocks. Okay, let me just try to print something and catch exception. Okay, I need to explain this also. I can do something like this, plus E, not here, let me just do it plus E. Okay, I can print the object of the exception class also. So if you see, the number cannot be divided by 0, this is my user defined error, plus E, it will print whatever the message is defined in the arithmetic exception class. So whatever the message is defined in the arithmetic exception class, I am printing that also. You can do like this to make the difference. So let's just check it. Alright, so even over here, if you try to pass print the object, so what this E will do, it will print the default message which is defined in array index out of bound exception class. So let's just check it. So array index out of bound exception, and what is the error? We are trying to initialize the array element at position 2, but we don't have array element at position 2. Now going back to the slides, exception E. Now exception is the, now if we are not sure what type of exception my code can cause, so I can use the exception statement to handle all type of exception. This will handle all type of exceptions, but the problem with this is this block can handle all exceptions. While we are using multiple catch statements, we need to remember that subclasses of the class exception inside catch must come before their superclasses. So exception, it's a generic superclass. It can handle any type of exception. If you are not sure that your code may cause which type of error, or you don't know some type of error, what type of error your code may cause, you can use the generic class exception E. But this exception E class must come at the end after defining all the type of the error classes. So for example, let me just make it as like string s is equals to null, and I try to print over here, alright, array1. Okay, and I try to print over here system.out.println s. I'm trying to print a string which does not exist, which does not have any element actually. Now this is not array index out of bound exception, this is not arithmetic exception, and I don't know if this type of error occurs, it belongs to which class. So what I can do, I can use catch exception E. This is the generic superclass which can handle all type of exceptions. So let's try it. System.out.println and generic exception, and let me just write it plus E. Let's just try to do it, because my error is over here when I am printing the null variable. It's not array index out of bound, so if you see over here, it prints null, that you have an error over here in the null. Let me just try to print the length of the string. Let me try to use this function, because it was just printing the string. Because my string doesn't has anything, so if you see, it's a generic exception and it's a null pointer exception, because it has printed what type of exception has occurred in my code. Now this generic exception, exception E, it should occur as a last catch block. It cannot occur anywhere. So if you see, if I try to put it somewhere, maybe here, anywhere in between or even in the beginning, it will cause an error. Wait, I think I messed up with the code. Here, let me just try to print it over, put it over here. It will cause an error. Arithmetic exception has already been caught. Okay, so let me try to put it over there as a first catch block. So out of bounds exception has already been caught, so we will get a syntax error over here. So this block should be the last block. It cannot occur anywhere. It can be, since this is a generic exception, this catch block should be the last catch block if you are using it. There can be multiple catch blocks. So if you see, this should be the last catch block. Alright, so let's go to our, so if you have seen, it will cause an unreachable catch block. We will have an unreachable catch block. Alright, going ahead. Nested try statement. A try statement can be nested inside another block of try, used when a part of block may cause one error while other may cause another error. So in case of inner try block does not have a catch handler for a particular exception, then the outer try catch block is checked for the match. So if we, for example, if we haven't included this catch block with this try block, it can be fine, and if it does not have a catch handler, then the outer try block will be searched for the nearest catch block. So if you see over here, array 3 third element divided by first element. So this is the third element, this is the first element. So it will cause divide by 0, and here we are just trying to initialize the fourth element. We don't have any fourth element, so it will cause the array index out of bound exception, so the control will go over here. Finally block. Now finally block will be executed whether your code has exception or not. So it is optional to use with a try block. You can use it or you cannot use it. So you have a try block, you have a catch block exception, and then you have a finally block which has statements. Now finally block will always be executed whether or not you have exception or not. So for example in this case, since we have arithmetic exception, number should not be divided by 0, and then it will execute the finally block and the statements outside the finally block will be executed. So for example, let's just do a program. Okay, let me just make it a very simple program. Okay, let me just not make okay, let's just do an error. So this is the program which we have done. Now what I will do, I will make a finally block here. Finally system.out.println, we are in the finally block. This block basically contains certain statement. For example, when we are working with the files, we want to close a file, we put it in the finally block. So certain statements which are mandatory when we are doing certain kinds of programs, they are put in the finally block. So finally block will always be executed whether or not there is an exception or not. So after the finally block, if we have certain statements, for example, system.out.println, this is the end of the program. Alright, then I write another statement, something we have used multiple catch blocks with finally block. So in this case, what will happen? We have an error over here, null pointer exception. So the because there is an error over here, this is not array index bound exception, so this catch block will not be executed. Arithmetic exception will not be executed, and then the control will go to the exception and it will print generic exception. After this, the control will go to the finally block, and after the finally block, if we still have the program, all the statements after the finally block will be executed. Alright, so let's just see it. So generic exception, Java lang null pointer exception, we are in the finally block, this is the end of the block, and we have used multiple catch blocks. So finally blocks is always executed. Alright, let me just make it over here 0. Now I have two exceptions. Exception over here in the 0 and exception over here null pointer. Now the exception whichever occurs first will be executed. In this case, because divide by 0, which is the arithmetic exception, occurs first over here, so it will only print divide by 0, it will not go to the next line. So whatever exception occurs first, that catch block will be executed. Alright, now let's just try not to have any error. String s, let me just, so this program does not have any logical error. So because it does not have any logical error, none of the catch block will be executed. Now the finally block will be executed and the statements out of the finally block will be executed. Statements inside the try block, which is s.length, will also be executed. So if you see 4, s.length, because Java has 4 letters, it prints 4. Next it goes to the none of the catch block is executed. So it goes to the finally block, and after the finally block, if we have certain statements, those are executed. So finally block is always executed whether or not we have an error in our program or not. So finally block must be associated with a try block. It cannot use finally without a try block. Should place those statements in this block that must be executed always. It's optional to use. And when there is no exception in the try block, finally block will always be executed after the try block. We have just learned now. If an exception occurs, then first of all catch block will be executed and then finally block will be executed. The statements present in the finally block execute even if the try block contains control transfer statements like return, break or continue. So this was all about in this lecture. Throwing exception in the methods we will discuss in the next lecture, and this will in this week only. So thank you so much.